It's a very good morning here in East Africa, Uganda, where we are live broadcasting from Acfim Talks. You are most welcome today, the 11th of November, 2022, and we discuss Uganda's consumptive borrowing. It's a good afternoon, good evening, and wherever you are watching from, welcome to Acfim Talks. My name is Felix Kafuma, your host, and I'll be introducing my guest in a short while. But before we get this off the ground, allow me, it's usually my practice to invite everybody out there who is joining us to subscribe to our social media platforms. We are live on Facebook and also live on Twitter. They should be able to display the Twitter handle and our Facebook account. But we are live on Facebook, on YouTube, Acfim UG, Facebook, Acfim UG, and Twitter, Acfim. You'll be able to see those displayed on our screen. Yes, there they are. You can just subscribe. You'll be able to get the updates and also be able to get the notifications when we are going live. Today, we are still at it. It's a follow-up on our last week's discussion. We were looking at, again, Uganda's debt burden. We all know recently Parliament just approved the 1.7 trillion Uganda shillings loan. I will be talking about that shortly. But also, it's important that we look at this in the broader perspective. What are the implications of this? What I've come to call the unquenchable thirst for borrowing to Uganda's economy, but also how does that translate to a common person? If you are just following this, you should be knowing by now. If not, allow me to let you know that Uganda's public debt has now hit 80 trillion shillings. That is both in domestic and external. Domestic debt is 33 trillion shillings, and then external debt is 47 trillion shillings. That makes our current debt figures 50% of the GDP. GDP is the gross domestic product, and according to the Deputy Governor, Bank of Uganda, Michael Ating Ego, who was interfacing with the Parliamentary Committee this week. But this comes in the wake of the 1.7 trillion commercial loan that was approved by Parliament last week, and we were able to come across that later from the Minister of Finance, Matia Kasaija, trying to show us a breakdown on how the 1.7 trillion shillings will be spent. Quick look at the breakdown. Part of that loan is going to be spent on constructing a conference hall at Munyonyo Commonwealth Resort to a tune of 86.4 billion shillings as they prepare to host a non-alignment movement conference that will take place next year. 39 billion will be spent on pension areas for Uganda Telecom Limited and Uganda Post Limited employees. And then a State House, as usual, will receive 155 billion shillings. Chira Motors will receive 20 billion shillings. And then 90.1 billion will be spent on salary enhancements for UPDF senior officers. And then also government plans to buy out the concession of Eskom, which is a South Africa power company that operates Chira hydropower plant, to a tune of 45 billion. And then also settle out of court the power company Albatross Energy Uganda. So you easily see when you look at the breakdown, most of it is not going to be spent on productive sectors. So and this comes also when our revenue collection does not necessarily match our expenditure. So, and that explains why we are perpetually having budget deficits. So if our debt service to revenue collection stands at 30%, this brings us into focus. Why do we borrow? What do we borrow the money for? And what is the implication to our economy? With me, I have a gentleman who is an economist. He is a regular here on Acfim Talks. Moses Mlondo is a journalist as well. Is the former president, Uganda Parliamentary Press Association, UPPA. Is an economist and a journalist working with the New Vision as one of their leading senior staff writers. Closely follows the national budget and is also the coordinator of the Greater Luweero Development Forum. Allow me to welcome Moses Mlondo. Moses, if you're on, are you on set? Yes.
Yes.
Moses, you are most welcome.
Thank you very much, my brother Felix Kafuma, for this opportunity.
Great. Let's hit it off straight away. Looking at let's start with the 1.7 trillion, which has raised a lot of split hairs across public, but also within Parliament. What is your honest opinion in terms of what you take of the 1.7 trillion that government borrowed? Remember, it's a commercial loan. Standard Chartered is just a middleman. What do you make of all this? Why are we borrowing 1.7 trillion shillings, and what does this mean?
Before I get to that, I want to first correct some inaccuracies that were given by Bank of Uganda, which you have actually quoted. Because I saw Bank of Uganda saying that for every 100 cents corrected by URA, 30 go to debt service. But it's more than that. It's more than that. I can authoritatively tell you, in the budget for the current financial year, which is 48 trillion, 18 trillion, 17.6 trillion, which is actually 18 trillion, has been earmarked for interest and debt payment. Now, the URA revenue collection target for this financial year is 25 trillion, but they have not been achieving the target. So our current revenue collection capacity actually oscillates between 22 and 25 trillion. But out of, let us say they will collect 23 trillion or 22 trillion, 18 trillion has been earmarked for interest payment and debt payment. So that gives you a percentage that is more than 60%. It means the bulk of the current financial crisis government is facing has been majorly caused by that the portion of our national budget that goes to debt repayment has been drastically going up over the years, and it has now reached a level where it is not sustainable. So currently, what URA collects, the biggest portion of it, the biggest percentage of what URA collects goes into interest and debt payment. Now, our wage bill has reached 5 trillion. So that tells you that when you put off the money for interest and debt payment and the wage bill, government will be left with no money from URA. So it means
Moses, yes, quickly, on that point of wage bill, this 5 trillion, does this include the salary enhancements that were made?
All those are included. Our wage bill has now reached 5 trillion. So that is why, by the way, in the release for the first quarter, the money government released was not even enough to pay salaries. I am sure you have been getting reports of different public workers, government workers who have not been getting salaries for 2 months, for 3 months. Even the medical interns, you can imagine even medical interns have laid down their tools, and one of the reasons for their strike was that they had not been paid for 2 months. So government, the government has not come out officially, by the way, to say that they are in a financial crisis. But for us who have been keenly following, even from the interactions that the Minister of Finance has had with the Finance Committee in Parliament there, they have confessed to them that they are in a financial crisis. So many projects, government projects, are on standstill Like the money they released for the first quarter, they only, out of the 10 trillion they released only 590 billions for development expenditures. So most of the government entities didn't even get money for development expenditures. Many government entities didn't get money even for operational costs. I saw one of the ministers on the floor of parliament saying she cannot even travel because they have no budget for fuel. But this crisis has been majorly created by the government's high appetite for borrowing, and over the years they have been duping the country that our borrowing, our public debt is sustainable. Our public debt is not sustainable, majorly because, for them they were only looking at the debt to GDP ratio, that it had not yet reached 50, because usually, it is well known that there is a common understanding that when the debt to GDP ratio reaches 50 and above, it becomes unsustainable. But there is one other factor, key component in making such assessments, which our policymakers have not been paying attention to, and that is the tax to GDP ratio, because that explains your capacity to pay back the debts that you get. And especially if a country like ours, a government like ours, that does not have state enterprises that generate extra revenue. Our government only depends on taxes. So Uganda's tax to GDP ratio, which keeps oscillating between 11% and 13%, is one of the lowest even in Africa, because Africa's average is 16%. So that tells you that our government does not have capacity to pay back all these loans they are getting. And that is why recently the Minister for Finance went to meet officials of IMF, World Bank, and what now they are begging for is to be forgiven some of the debts, because our debt portfolio has reached at a level where it is no longer sustainable. Now, the current situation has been worsened by development partners also cutting off funding coming to Uganda. And that is why now government is resorting to the commercial loans that you talked about, the 1.7 trillion from Standard Chartered Bank. And Standard Chartered Bank is actually acting like a broker, and they are getting their commission. It is and that is why there was a standoff in Parliament when it was being passed, because really it is a very expensive loan, and it is just going to worsen the situation by the way. And I have been told that there are many other loans in the pipeline, because government is in a very serious financial problem. So many development projects, by the way, that are being delayed because government has no money, are also going to attract interest. And eventually, these projects will end up being more expensive than they were initially envisaged. And so that is the big problem that we have. Unfortunately, in Uganda, we have reached at a level where we are even borrowing for the current expenditures. I saw a video clip of former Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta when he was still president. And he was boasting, he was saying Kenya is far much better than the neighboring countries, that in as much as we also borrow, but at least for us, we don't borrow to meet our recurrent expenditures like paying salaries. But for us, Uganda, we are now even borrowing for our recurrent expenditures, for UPDF classified expenditures, and so many other administrative expenditures which do not have economic returns. I saw the Deputy Governor Bank of Uganda actually cautioning when he was in Parliament. I was there in that meeting, and he was saying that the challenge that he has, the problem that he has with the current borrowing by government, is that many of the things for which government borrows for, they do not have high economic returns, and that is what will make our debt unsustainable. So that is the situation we are in as a country, and the situation is also worsened by corruption. You remember, because there was a report by Bamugemeirire Catherine on UNRA, And that report established that about 9 trillion that had been allocated to that sector for roads, 4 trillion of the 9 trillion had been stolen. Because government keeps arguing that much of their borrowing is for infrastructure projects, but even this is a government official probe report, and it is indicating that 4 of the 9 trillion that was allocated to that sector was stolen. And the way it was stolen, it was said that the contractors were conniving with government officials to do show the work. So the value for which we are paying for was much less than what we are getting, and that is why our roads get potholes shortly after they have been constructed. They give us thin layers, roads that cannot last for long, and that is where we are as a country. So, by the way, the current situation, the financial crisis government is facing, if it is to get out of it, it requires them to undertake radical reforms, which I don't think they are able to do so, given the character of our government, because the cost of public administration is so huge. We have a bloated cabinet, we have a huge parliament, we have created so thousands and thousands of administrative units which are not actually economically viable. Our local governments, there are reports indicating that 68% of the money sent to local governments alone is on salaries only. When you add on other recurrent expenditures, about 90% of the money that we are sending to local governments is going to recurrent expenditure. So these are entities that really have no economic sense, that need to be actually remodeled. And I remember one of the presidential candidates was Geno Biraro. He was promising to turn local governments into economic entities that can generate revenue and be economically viable. So that's where we are as a country. Government is in a crisis and they are resorting to more borrowing, moreover, commercial loans, which are very expensive, which will only worsen our public debt situation. And the development partners are, by the way, our public debt you talked about of 80 trillion is also understated, because there are reports that government has borrowed money from Bank of Uganda. It is not included. I saw the Shadow Minister of Finance, Mwanga Chivumbi, putting it at 12 trillion. Government has borrowed from Bank of Uganda. But 2 days ago, one of the state ministers for finance was saying they have borrowed 4 trillion. But even 4 trillion is a lot of money. And I have heard one of the reasons some of the development partners have withheld funding to Uganda is that they have given government a condition to first pay back the money borrowed from Bank of Uganda. Because what we have heard is that because of the crisis government is facing, they have borrowed more than they are required to borrow from Bank of Uganda by law. So that is where we are, and the Bank of Uganda has actually created more fears when they appeared before Parliament in the course of this week, when they said that the situation is not about to normalize. Their prediction is that the current economic challenges we are facing as a country, of high commodity prices, of high interest rates, of high inflation, is likely to go on up to 2024. So that is what Bank of Uganda has predicted. And because of the crisis we are facing, Bank of Uganda has been forced to undertake monetary policy measures to control the situation, especially by increasing the CBR rate, which had gone down to up to 6.5%, but now they have raised it to 10%. And whenever the central bank raises the CBR rate, the lending rate, the commercial banks also raise the interest rates they charge. So currently, it is extremely difficult to do business in Uganda because capital for doing business is extremely expensive. The interest rates are very high, partly because of the high inflation. So that is the challenge that we are having as a country, and I am ready to answer more questions, Mr.
Uh, You're still watching Acfim Docs. That's a very rich submission, but I'm very concerned. Some of the figures you're giving, anybody who will listen out there should actually get concerned. First of all, in terms of corruption laws, I think also IDG has a report where almost the figures they put out, almost close to half of our annual budget, 20 trillion is lost annually to corruption. So we have a problem on one hand of poor, or what we call mismanagement of resources. Then we're also borrowing, and what we're borrowing is going into consumptive spending. But let me come back to, there were certain proposals made around rationalization, making mergers. I think that was still ongoing, trying to cut down on current expenditures. What is stopping government from taking these radical reforms? Because there is that common saying, if you are digging a hole, at some point you have to stop digging, because the further you dig this, the more you sink. And you figure out how you get out of that hole, what I call a rapid hole. So why is government not necessarily considering undertaking these radical reforms and opt for borrowing, yet they know it's not sustainable? Where are the economists that can advise government in these matters? Are we just victims of patronage politics?
Yeah, first of all, of course, government has been dragging their feet concerning the issue of rationalization of government and reducing wasteful expenditures. They have been just paying us lip service, and they are not serious about it. And that is evidenced, solidified by the way money is allocated in the national budget. Even in the current situation, I have seen a report from the Shadow Minister for Finance, Mwanga Chivumi, that even in the current situation, government has just spent a supplementary budget of about 1.4 trillion, which is yet even to go to Parliament, and the bulk of it, about 97% of it, is recurrent expenditures. Money going to State House, money going to classified expenditures, recurring, even in the situation we are in. So, I have always said, and I want to say it again, that most likely it will take a new government to undertake those radical reforms, because they are necessary. If you or I became president of this country, that would be the first thing to do, to put the country back on track. You would have to do what Magufuli did in Tanzania: radical measures for eliminating wasteful expenditures in government. But the current government, it is very unlikely that they will do it. But the only reason they may be compelled to do it, especially where we have reached, is that now they have reached in a situation where the revenue they have at their disposal is not enough to meet debt obligations and pay salaries. That is why they are not now releasing even enough money for paying salaries. And I'm sure that situation in which they have reached, which will continue worsening, by the way, is what will compel them to undertake those radical measures of merging some entities that are doing almost the same work, of reducing on wasteful expenditures, on travels abroad, of reducing the size of cabinet, of reducing the size of parliament, and so many other radical measures that need to be undertaken. They will certainly, where we have reached, because government is in a crisis. You can imagine now, for the last 3-4 months, we are in November now, for the last about 5 months, majority of government workers have been earning salaries, but with no work to be done, because they were only given, entities were only given money to pay salaries, but they were not given even money for operational costs. They cannot move around to undertake activities. It means we are actually paying them salaries for doing nothing. So that is the situation in which we are.
Okay, thank you. We I'll fire one more question before we go for a break. I've been looking at our debt curve, and it's this situation. You can only account for it. I think the last 5 years is when our debt curve has been rising very steep. What is it government did then that it's not doing now? What changed? Because I think you from around 2015 onwards, we started seeing our debt curve rising steeply. And the last 3 years have been worse. I think we've grown by about 23% in terms of debt, our debt portfolio. What is it? What explains those 5 magical years that have, can I call them magical years, or I call them the 5 years where we seem to be on a free fall in terms of the way we manage our debts compared to before? What changed? It's the same government. What's changed?
Within that same period, by the way, you need to remember that so many local governments have been created. Within that same period, you have to remember that our parliament, which was about 365 MPs, is now about 555 MPs. Within that same period, government has come up with so many ambitious infrastructure projects, like the power dams, like a number of road projects. And we are actually, where we have reached now, there are so many, we have a number of projects in the pipeline. We have the oil refinery, we have the oil pipeline, we have the standard gauge railway. Now, if government is to seriously implement those major projects, because they are going to cost us billions of dollars, if government is to undertake them, I don't know where we shall be. Because now, like for the standard gauge railway, we needed about $12 billion. For a small economy like ours, that would be a lot of money. The oil refinery, we need about $5 billion. So I think because of that, government in the situation we are in, they will have to hold some of these projects. Because if we are to implement them, for the standard gauge railway, I saw the minister telling Parliament that one of the reasons they have delayed is that China had given a condition of attaching our oil as a condition for giving us a loan for our standard gauge railway, and which government did not accept. So that is the situation in which we are. More government units have been created, administrative units created, cabinet has become bigger, parliament has become bigger, and government has come up with so many ambitious projects. Yet our tax base has not been significantly expanding. That is why we are in this situation.
There you have it. You're still watching Acfim Talks, and I'm having this conversation with Moses Mulondo, who is the journalist and economist. Let's go for a break, and then when we return, we'll continue with the discussion.
Something is wrong. No one is coming to me. Nobody is minding about me. No one is yearning to see me. Hey? What is the problem?
Then we should go before they come.
Are you mad? I changed all this money for them. I want them to ask. I want to give them all this money, but no one is minding. Nobody. I changed all this for them. This is all money for them.
What should I do? How do I carry?
You go there and tell them to. You go. No. You just go. Talk to them one by one. Hey, what has happened? Exactly. Thank you for coming. You know, this is how the place has changed. What is the matter?
What is it exactly?
No one is yearning to see me. Nobody is minding. No one is asking for money. Nothing.
Oh, is that what you mean? No. Honorable, let me tell you this.
Yes.
Things changed.
Changed?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
As we, your campaigning managers, we agreed that we need parliamentarians, our honorable MPs, who present issues in parliament.
So is that what you decided?
That's what we decided.
The desire of any progressive democracy is to have citizens who focus on issue-based politics and not transactional politics, which suffocates representative democracy.
Contribute today at www.politicalfinanceafrica.org/donate.
You're still watching Acfim Talks. Welcome back. You can be part of this conversation. We're discussing Uganda's consumptive borrowing. What are the implications? And I'm with an economist and a journalist, Moses Mulondo, who is helping us make sense and paint the picture of the situation. And indeed, he has said that things are just going to get worse. It's not about to get any better, so you better prepare yourselves for the next, I think he said until 2024, he was quoting the Bank of Uganda deputy director on that issue. But Moses, let me bring you back in here. I've been looking at, I think I've tracked supplementary budgets for the last 3 to 4 years. But also most of these loans that we borrow or we get. And there is that one common constant budget item called State House. What is it with State House? And almost on every budget supplement, almost on every money borrowed, there is a State House expenditure. What is it with spending on State House constantly? Is there a problem here?
That can be actually explained by that advert we've just seen. That politics is transactional politics. Because there is a very huge budget for presidential donations, which used to be about 30 billions, but now is more than 200 billions for presidential donations. And of course, that is majorly used to gain political support from different sections of our community. But also now increasingly, State House is also having a classified budget. Even in that supplementary expenditure of 1.4 trillion I've just talked about, which they have just spent, a big portion of it was categorized as a classified expenditures for State House. So State House, about 7 years ago, the budget for State House was about 140 billions. As we speak now, it is approaching 1 trillion. Actually, the other year it was more than a trillion. That year when we were entering general elections, and that explains what I have just told you, our transactional politics. That now this is one of the conduits through which the ruling party, the NRM party that is in power, and these are things Acfim actually has investigated about. I'm sure you've come up with a number of reports on these issues of political financing. So for the party that is in power, one of the main conduits which they use are these classified expenditures and budgets going to State House, which you cannot question a lot. The legislators there, because they are one of the beneficiaries. You know, these are people who frequently meet the president and he gives them some money. So they easily pass such budgets because they know they are among the beneficiaries. When an MP is stranded or they can come up with a small group, they go meet the president, and he gives them money. And that is why we, even in the current financial crisis that we have, we still have our state house getting close to $1 trillion. By the way, if you add on the money, that because the office of the president also has a separate vote, so when you combine both votes, the money we spend on the presidency, it is certainly more than $1 trillion, and that's too much money given the scarce resources that we have as a country, given the public debt challenge that we have as a country. So currently, by the way, part of the money we are borrowing from commercial banks and other creditors, it is going to those recurrent expenditures of state house and other recurrent expenditures, which do not have serious economic returns.
Interesting. Now, let's briefly talk about the issue of commercial loans, which seem to be now it's the new route government is taking. You've just explained the reason why they are finding themselves in a situation whereby they have to opt for commercial loans as opposed to concessional loans is because of the conditions development partners have put in place. But what is the danger? Because me, I understand, but someone out there in the public may not understand who's following us. What is the danger of commercial loans in this case?
You see, commercial loans are extremely expensive. They don't have a grant element like the concessional loans. So those commercial loans, actually, you were even asking why in these recent years our public debt has skyrocketed from about $1.8 billion 10 years ago to now more than $20 billion. One of the reasons why it is skyrocketing, why it is increasing at a very high rate, is because increasingly government is going for commercial loans, both domestically and externally. Because even the loans that we keep getting from China are mostly commercial loans, which are very expensive. So that is where we are as a country, that the government, given the financial crisis they are facing, they are increasingly resorting to commercial loans. But also you need to understand that all countries in the world, because of COVID-19 issues to do with fuel oil, the Russia-Ukraine war, and a number of global factors, nearly all economies in the world are struggling. And so even countries that were putting money in baskets like that of IMF and World Bank have cut off on the money they are putting in there, and they are using the money to solve the economic challenges they are having in their countries. So we should not be expecting that we shall be getting more concessional loans in the nearby future, because these countries that have been providing these concessional loans are also struggling. They are having their own challenges. But also, our politics here as a country, we had an election 2021 which was contested. The outcome was contested. It had so many challenges. People were killed, people were tortured, thousands are still in jail, and it created an ugly image on our country. So especially those in the opposition have been engaging development partners who are funding us to withhold their funding to Uganda because of human rights violations happening in the country. And there is a high likelihood that one of the reasons government is in the current financial crisis is that many of these development partners have cut off their funding to Uganda. And increasingly, by the way, development partners are not entrusting our government with funds because of many reasons: human rights violations, corruption within government. You've seen the debate on the Ebola money that partners chose to channel it directly to civil society groups and other organizations directly involved, and not through the Ministry of Health. It is partly because they know there is a high rate of corruption within government, and that is the direction we are going into. So that's where we are, my brother.
There is on that one. Last week I hosted one of the economists who argued that on the same point that commercial loans are also, because they do not have a lot of conditions other than paying back, other than the high interest on them, but the conditions they are prone to abuse. It's easier to abuse commercial loans than concessional loans. I don't know how far true that assertion is.
I want to agree with what you just said, because now concerning the 1.7 trillion loan or 455 million euros that we are getting from Standard Chartered Bank, I was in the meeting where the Minister of Finance had presented that loan request in Parliament there before the National Economic Committee, and they were asked to give a breakdown of how that money would be used. And that breakdown was not given. Because with commercial loans, the lenders do not give you conditions on where you have to spend the money. As long as you have accepted on the interest that they are going to charge you, as long as for them they are making money out of that loan, they will just give you the loan. So there is a high likelihood, but for with concessional loans, which mostly come from entities like IMF, World Bank, they are also mindful of where you're going to put the money, so that they ensure the money is not really wasted. So, but with commercial loans, there is a high likelihood that part of this loan that we are getting from Standard Chartered Bank is actually what is going to fund the 1.4 trillion supplementary budget that has just been spent. And I told you that the bulk of it, more than 90% of it, actually has gone into recurrent expenditures, which does not make sense actually. That you would borrow money at a commercial rate and you spend it on recurrent expenditures. It means that you have not created avenues for generating more revenue in the economy to be able to pay back such loans. That is the situation we are in as a country.
Okay, Moses, you are privy to the discussions within the walls of Parliament, and here, me and you are having this conversation. A few individuals who are concerned are having this conversation, but the bigger question here is whether is there a genuine conversation within the leaders? For example, let's just look at Parliament, because they're the ones who approve these loans, who pass these loans. Is there a genuine conversation to address the crisis we are in, or this is just one of those things where they think, okay, let's see how far this goes. When we crash, we crash. Are people are those leaders, those responsible, having a very genuine conversation around our unsustainable loan portfolio?
Well, that is a very interesting question and very relevant. Of course, like I told you, Parliament as an institution is one of the beneficiaries of these monies. They directly benefit, and that is why it is very unlikely that you can see any of these loans rejected by Parliament. You saw, even you had reports of what happened in the budget committee, that some of the members, but this is a common occurrence anyway, even in all other committees, that MPs usually lobby, engage leaders of different government entities to ensure that they take services to their constituencies to give them political mileage. So, and because of that, it is very unlikely in the situation we are in and the character of Parliament that we have and the character of the quality of democracy that we have as a country, it is very unlikely that you will have any loan request going to that Parliament that will be not passed. So, of course, many times they have tried, especially in the course of debating in the committee. You see that these MPs are concerned and they make strong resistance, but eventually you only hear that the loan letter was passed. So that's where we are, where our public data has reached. It is really unsustainable because right now, close to 70% of what URA collects is going to debt repayment. But if government continues to borrow at the current rate of borrowing, in the next 2 to 5 years, there is a high likelihood that the percentage of what URA collects that goes to interest and debt payment is likely to reach 90%, and that will be a very big crisis for us, which means that the balance will not even be enough for us to pay government workers because we now have a very huge wage bill of 5 trillion.
And I'm picking it from that point you've just made. If the trend continues as is, you are saying, we are most likely to see 90% of revenue collected channeled to address to pay back the debt. Now, in view of that, what is the most likely scenario? Because there is no guarantee and there is no indication that we are going to stop borrowing. It is predicted that for the next 2 years, perhaps it's going to get worse. So let's do scenario building here. What is the most likely scenario if we continue the way we are in terms of beyond just the economy, but me as a common person, I'll ask myself, okay, so what? What should I prepare myself for? What as a citizen?
First of
what
all,
should I
by
prepare?
the way, when you look at the forecast made by Bank of Uganda, that the situation will continue as it is with the economic challenges we have up to 2024, and that is just a prediction. It could even go beyond that. Now, that means that in this current term, service delivery will be at its poorest ever, and that actually, if we are in a mature democracy, that would greatly endanger the government in power, the ruling party. It would greatly endanger them because it would mean that in the next general elections, they would have problems to explain to the voters on
account.
why they had not changed their situation. And that would actually give mileage to those who are opposed to government. The other possible scenario is if the situation, we are actually lucky as a country that we have a lot of food. Remember, 43% of East Africa's arable land is in Uganda, where you can easily grow food. So, as a country, even when we have crises, usually we have plenty of food. If we were one of those countries without plenty of food, countries where, including our neighboring country here, Kenya, that people have to depend on government to eat food from government subsidies, from government stores, you would be seeing people running on the streets to protest into an uprising to overthrow government. But our government is lucky that this is the pearl of Africa that is naturally endowed, that even when we have so many big problems, majority of the people can afford to have food on their plate. But because there are moments when we have had drought and we have had a serious food shortage, if we can go into that kind of phase where people will not have food, then we are likely to see some people and activists inciting the population to rise up against government and perhaps overthrow it. But if I were the Minister for Finance or if I were the President in the current situation, because borrowing can be stopped. By the time Magufuli had died, he had stopped much of the borrowing, and they were predominantly depending on their revenue they generate internally, and they were using it to undertake so many big infrastructure projects. after the savings they had made through the reforms that he undertook. So if I were the president, I would undertake those radical measures. Reduce the cost of public administration, reduce money going to State House, reduce money that every year, the amount of money we spend on classified expenditures for defense, even when we don't have a civil war, more than 2 trillion really, it's not necessary. So what we need are those radical reforms that would reduce wasteful expenditures, that would save a lot of money, and the money that would save we would actually use it to undertake a number of projects, and we would not need to continue with borrowing, especially commercial borrowing. Maybe the only window that would be left would be for the concessional loans, which have a grant element.
Thank you so much. We are almost bringing this to a close, and I will allow Moses to have his parting shots. But one other question I would want you to answer, as you have your parting shots, about what are the implications if we fail to pay the debts? Because that is also a scenario we can't rule out. The debt, if the debt is unsustainable, we may then fail to pay the debt. So what is the likelihood that we may fail to pay the debts, given the way we are behaving in terms of accumulating debts?
Of course, most of these debts that we have are commercial loans, and it is very even unlikely that we shall be forgiven these loans, because the people who gave us the money are doing business and they want their money back. So that is why we are in the current situation, because if we had an option of not paying, government would not be in a situation where it even lacks enough money to pay salaries, or even for operational costs for its ministries and other entities to do work. So already we are in a crisis, my brother, where a government cannot be able to pay all the salaries to meet the entire wage bill, where a government is not able. There was an economic conference at Serena where I put up my hand and I put this to the secretary to the treasury, and I told him that you have only released the money for salaries. Entities don't even have money to travel around and do activities, and we are paying them for not doing any work. Why are we in this situation? And his response was that the resources they have are not enough, and he said they are only doing what is within their means to keep government running. So that is where we are. We are already in a crisis, by the way. Only that government cannot come out officially, openly, and tell the country that, ladies and gentlemen, fellow citizens, government is in a financial crisis and we are not able to pay salaries. We are not able to continue with a number of development projects which we had started on. We are not able to meet operational costs. We are already in a crisis, my brother. And that crisis.
Do we have some of our national assets attached in this case that we should get concerned? We've seen it happening in other countries.
Certainly that cannot be ruled out, because especially for loans from China, because these are commercial loans. If we fail to pay them, unfortunately, we've not most of these loans. We never look at the conditionalities that are put in these loans. But there is like you remember on the loan about Entebbe Airport, which there were such conditions in that loan. It was a very bad loan agreement, and it became so controversial, and so many people condemned it. So there is a very high likelihood that a time can come when some of our national assets can be attached for the creditors to get back their money.
Okay, there you have it. You know the situation. You know where we are, and now you know how you should try to survive within the current context in the next 2 to 3 years, as projected. That was Moses Mulondo, who is an economist and a journalist and a former president for Uganda Parliamentary Press Association. He's also a coordinator of Greater World Development Forum. So it's good to have you to discuss issues of national importance. And myself, Felix Kafuma, was the moderator for today. Until next week, same time. Bye-bye. Take care. God bless.